So glad that you've joined us today. And yeah, with the group we have, I'm hoping it'll be a great conversation. What I wanted to touch on today was not so much any one recall, but the differences in communicating an acute crisis like a foodborne pathogen, for example, and what we call a chronic or um, an everyday crisis, which for the peanut industry would be things like aflatoxin, heavy metals, although we don't have much of a heavy metal problem, is my understanding. Probably aflatoxin is the best example, maybe pesticides. So I wanted to talk about the difference in how we communicate in both cases, because they're very, very different. And I know both of you have quite a bit of experience. So what I'd like to do is just kick it off by asking you what you have seen as the differences, and we can use recalls as a specific, case studies or to compare. But just in general, what has been your experience in the differences?
Well, I think first, if I'm following what you're asking, when it's a product recall, such as Jif, we don't play in that space at all. We supply whatever. I refer back to when Patrick was here, and we had the really big one, the PCA back then. Anything that y'all needed in putting together the case, we were able to supply to y'all, but we didn't interact with media in any way, shape, or form. We referred any calls to y'all.
Yeah.
But on the alpha toxin or heavy metals, rarely do we see a story that's about peanuts and alpha toxin, but about alpha toxin and peanuts are drawn into it. So it's not totally a focus on peanuts. And I think when you look around the world at the different systems for analyzing things, in this country, we probably have the best system that we can for managing it. Obviously, we'd like to eliminate it, and we've spent millions over the years trying to do that, and have not been able to do that yet. There's some real promising things that for the last 3 years, we've gotten, I think it's $3 or $4 million a year from the federal government for alpha toxin research, and all of it's being done at the Dawson Lab. Like in November the 8th, we're having an update on all the 30 projects that they've been doing. And a couple of those projects are really showing promise in dealing with alpha toxin. Another one is a procedure where you would take your seed and coat them with some product that's it's not sprayed on, but it's almost like that dipped in it, and plant those seeds. They're showing real promise that of eliminating alpha toxin for that year. But since it's in the ground, it's pretty bad to work on. But I see those being totally different. But once again, on alpha toxin, we all help draft the APC standby statements, and we'll try to just send it to crisis management. Y'all, we don't do crisis management. So
Yeah.
that's that. We don't play in y'all's space on that.
No, but you're so right that you are a vital part of the network that supports and provides the information that we use for our messaging. So it's still an important connection there. Yeah.
I think it's important that we, as an industry, recognize different lanes and people stay in their lane and do that. The media doesn't need to have conflicting comments from the peanut board, from us, from different people. It needs to be from one source.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. Renee?
I mean, I just remember the PCA the most, and I remember how there was I believe it was an IPF, and everybody was supposed to go to that, and Patrick had to stay back, and he and Cindy stayed up till like sometimes 2 and 3 in the morning. They would be sending out new information. They were on standby the whole time just to make sure word got out, and that we were trying to handle it as best as we could, and give out more information as we got it. So that's the main recall that I've done. Not dealt with
Because-
personally, but wasn't, a part of.
Yeah, yeah,
Well,
you both.
it was a recall that not only did we have to go through the recall, then we had to go through the months of the trial and all the information.
Years.
And the trial was here in Albany, in the heart of peanut country. So it just drug it out a lot longer than would have been necessary.
And
Yeah.
you still hear more about it in the media too, because they're trying to get out earlier or whatever. I saw an article
Well,
recently.
it's referenced a lot in a ton of articles because they received the most severe sentence of anybody.
Yeah.
So I think it still comes up quite a bit when I do the peanut in the media searches.
Yeah,
It ended peanuts being the poster child for food safety legislation in Washington, so that kept coming up on my political stand on the Hill. It just wouldn't go away, so it's fine with me that Stewart's still in jail.
yeah. I mean, I hate to say it, but and this, I'm hoping this doesn't sound wrong, but the fact that it was so egregious and that the violations were so blatant made it less of an industry issue and more of a company issue. And that, I think, was the industry was affected, absolutely. And we don't ever want peanuts in any context to be, as you say, the poster child for this sort of thing. But especially as the trial went on and facts came out, the media began to focus more on the company and the people who were running the company and their processes and procedures, rather than saying this is an industry-wide problem. And I think that's very, very unfortunate it happened at all. Terrible that it was so egregious, but on one hand, it allowed the industry to distance itself from the company, which is good. Yeah. So John, you mentioned, aflatoxin. There have been aflatoxin recalls. Matter of fact, the last one for dried, roasted, unsalted peanuts was in 2021. And when I went back and looked at the archives, there's a recall on peanuts for aflatoxin there was a recall on for aflatoxin on peanuts almost every year between 2014 and 2000, I think 14, 15, 16. And then there was a little bit of a break, and then we had a couple in 2018, 20, and 21. So it happens, but not a lot. And you correctly point out that when it does, it's the risk obviously is longer term, right? It's not like if you eat this today, you or your child could get sick and end up in the hospital 3 days from now. It's much longer term, and so the risk perception is different. And that's one of the main differences when we look at acute issues versus this what I call chronic or everyday issues that come up. And there are a couple of other things. So Renee, you mentioned the factor of time. So with something like a foodborne illness, we have to act very quickly, and we're acting before we often have all of the facts. We have to act. Whereas with something that is longer term, a longer term risk like aflatoxin, we have a lot more time to gather information. John, your group has time to do research. We have time to get third-party influencers and researchers on board, get everybody on the same message. We're not as rushed as in a more acute crisis. So we may come to John or Renee, for something to do with an acute crisis, and we need it now. Whatever you have, just give it to us. We'll work with it. Or hopefully, because we have a plan, we've already gotten some of that information. Whereas with those chronic issues, there's a lot more time to pull together more details. And because of that, our messaging is different. So in an acute crisis that's happening right now, whether it's a foodborne illness or something else, a worker injury, we have to develop our messaging right away. And we may have a plan that gives us a guideline, but we still have to immediately start to adjust and massage and edit those for the moment. Whereas with the chronic issues, because we have a longer time frame, our messaging can be a little more detailed, a little more nuanced. We can take the time to educate and inform and explain. It's not all about the immediate risk, like in the first situation. So our messaging is very different. The channels are different. So with an acute crisis, we're obviously not going to publish a paper in a journal or write an article in a monthly magazine, because that's not going to be timely enough. So the channels that we use are very different. A lot of social media, a lot of interviews with traditional media, emails out to the industry, maybe webinars with the industry, and customers. Whereas the longer term, we can have more featured articles in magazines explaining and putting the risk in context. So there's a lot on the communication side that in the two cases are very different, and therefore affects the information, like John, that we're coming to you for, and the time frame that you have. It changes the dynamics quite a bit. Just out of curiosity, have either of you even heard of one of these recalls for aflatoxin?
I have not.
Yeah, I hadn't either until I looked it up. There's a site called Food Counsel, counsel like legal counsel, because a law firm maintains the database, and they've gone in and put in all of the recalls for the last I think 10 years, and they've done a great job of putting in search engines. And so I just looked up aflatoxin, and Skippy peanut butter was recalled for high aflatoxin in 2020, for example. In 2021, it was the dry roasted unsalted peanuts. And then there was another one in 2021 for shelled peanuts. Yeah, and I just, it kind of got by me as well. So it does happen, but because of this risk perception, it often goes unnoticed. But having said that, and I would put heavy metals in the same category, even though at the moment my understanding is heavy metals are peanuts don't typically have a problem meeting thresholds for heavy metals. But have you either of you heard of the Closer to Zero program by FDA? FDA's Closer to Zero program.
Oh.
Yeah. So it's a program that they launched in 2021, April, I think, of 2021. And it's dedicated to mitigating, not so much removing, because they understand that you can't remove things like heavy metals completely. But mitigating heavy metals in the food supply, particularly, and eventually it'll be for all populations, but right now they're focusing on babies and young children. Babies first, infants, then young children. So this is why you may have heard several articles. Every once in a while, you'll hear about heavy metals in baby food. And that's where this is coming from, because they're focusing on baby food first, and working with industry, both on the mitigation side and trying to help them find tools to mitigate heavy metals in the food, but also enforcement, obviously. And the idea is to get as close to zero as we can. I think, and what I've heard is that when they, and it'll probably be years, but when they're they feel comfortable, they've made a lot of progress in foods that infants and babies eat, they will move to young children. And that's when I think we'll see more attention on peanut butter, for example, and whatever heavy metals at the time they may find. Now, I don't expect that the problem is, if we don't have a problem now, I'm certainly optimistic that we won't by the time they get around to young children.
It's
And they're looking,
understanding that heavy metals are in the soil. So
yes,
if you plant peanuts repeatedly in that soil, and we did a pretty extensive test a few years back on heavy metals, and it didn't show up, then it probably won't show up again in the next test. But and it's not something that the weather changes. It's either there or not there, is what I'm saying.
right, unless there's some kind of environmental something happens environmentally that changes that. But I don't see many peanut fields near petroleum refineries. So yeah, that's what I mean. I think that and I don't know the soil conditions obviously in all of the states, but the one study that was done looked at Georgia, and that was looked at 2015, 16, and 17, I think. I may be 1 year off. And there wasn't a problem with the heavy metals that they're looking at, which is mainly lead, arsenic, cadmium, and mercury. So you're right, we shouldn't. However, from a communication standpoint, we're going to have to make sure that that's the case, that's clear, that people understand that, right? Because right now it isn't on the consumer's radar. If and when it is on the radar of FDA, then we want to make sure that that we're there with our talking points to put that risk in context. And Tracy and her team, and at APC have, as you said, John, we have we're calling them backgrounders, but we've taken the standby statements and we're making them consumer friendly. I don't think, Tracy, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think they've probably made it as far through the approval process as getting to John's desk, but
No, not yet.
yeah, because we just drafted it. So anyhow, so the point is that
study, it was a nationwide study in all peanut producing areas.
Okay,
So it exists. It's a peer-reviewed published paper.
well, let me make sure I'm looking at the right one. John, do you remember who the author was, or?
Yeah, it'll either be Benjamin Blair or Marshall Lamb.
Blair or Williams?
Oh no, Blair or Lamb.
Got it. Got it. Thank you.
Mhm.
So yeah, so the point is that whether or not we have a problem, we're going to want to be prepared to communicate that, whatever our position is, and the minimize the risk perception, right? Because as we talked about the first time, risk perception can be more powerful than the actual risk itself. And so we want to make sure that we stay on top of the perception. Yeah. Can you think of anything else other than aflatoxins, heavy metals, any other longer term perceived, not actual, but perceived risk?
Salmonella.
Yeah, yeah, unfortunately. That would be, if it happened, it would be an acute crisis. That's yeah, yeah. Pesticides can be another one, right? Although to my knowledge, it hasn't been much of an issue with peanuts. Do you have any historical background on that, John or Renee, in terms of pesticides?
No, I really think the U.S. peanut industry's done a wonderful job on pesticides. And once again, in fact, the paper's being written right now. It's a joint APSA and APC paper it is a pesticide residue test that was done nationwide. The results are all in, and Blair and Lamb have writing a paper on this as well. And we should have it within a couple more months.
Wow, that is great to know. Tracy, we'll want to make sure that as the latest study that's been done, it gets into the pesticide backgrounder, don't you think?
Yeah, definitely. Making a note of that.
Oh yeah, me too. Okay, great. Yeah, I mean, again, we're talking about perceived risk, not actual, but in order to have the information to combat perception, we have to have the real science. So, it's great that the science says that we don't have residues, and to have that, if the perception that we have residues ever comes up, to have that solid science behind us is really what will strengthen our arguments.
Well, let me say this just for the record while we're talking. The reason we do these studies is not just to have the data for crisis management, which is obviously
Right.
very valuable, but it's our customers who buy the peanuts are beginning to demand all these tests, and they're very costly and time consuming. So what they do is do the test nationwide about every 3 to 5 years, and they just attach a copy of that study, and that meets the requirement for all the testing.
Yeah, I didn't realize there was a customer requirement, but it doesn't surprise me at all. I had assumed the industry was doing it for the reason you stated, in terms of just, being able to know what the situation is. But the fact that customers are asking for it, like I say, doesn't surprise me.
And that's increased a lot in the last 10 years.
Yeah, I'm sure it has. I mean, I have not heard yet. Well, let me think about that.
Let me add to that, more international than domestic.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. That's important to know too. Interesting. I was going to say I hadn't heard of any food industry, being asked for heavy metal testing, but I do know of one instance where one customer has asked for heavy metal testing in leafy greens. Not, I think it was specifically cadmium.
Okay.
But so far that's been isolated. And to your point, John, the fact that you've done this study, and especially if it's kept current, or there is evidence that it hasn't changed at all, then having that data, if a customer ever starts to head in that direction, or customers ever start to head in that direction, could be very helpful. Because it certainly wouldn't surprise me. They seem to ask for whatever they want to ask for, right?
You're being kind. They demand it. They don't ask.
Yeah, I'm being kind, aren't I? Yes, you're right. Yeah. Oh, well, so we talked a little bit about, the aflatoxin recalls, and we didn't get into a lot of details because, mainly they kind of came and went as we talked. What I mainly wanted to talk about was just the differences in the way we communicate about issues, whether they're, salmonella, it's an acute issue, or aflatoxin, a chronic issue, and how that affects the working relationship that that we have, right? The type of information we ask for, the timeliness that we need it in. It's just the messaging that we're, as we go through these backgrounders and the statements that we have, trying to put that risk into context and doing that for something that is immediate and something that is more long term requires a little different messaging. And so that's mainly what I wanted to just bring to the forefront today.
Good points.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I would love, I know this is our last one, but I would love to hear John, Renee, anytime you want to send me, a question or an email or talk through a communication issue, just contact Tracy, and I'd be more than happy to just jump on a call and have a conversation. I'm very passionate about what it takes to communicate what can be very complicated scientific matters around the food industry, and love to share it and learn from you as well.
Well, appreciate that. And, I don't know that we've ever really taught one-on-one. You're really a champion, and the way that APC handled the whole GIF recall recently, but even the PCA recall. We appreciate that on behalf of the industry.
Thank you. My pleasure.